Hi, I'm Michelle Suskauer. Welcome to another edition of Insure Wealth. And welcome to our expert, Howard Kaye. Hello, Howard.
Hello, Michelle. Thank you for having me again this week.
It's great to have you here. And to our certified financial planner, our guest today, George Karp.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
It's great to have you as well. Today, you're in for a surprise. Municipal bonds, safe, tax-free, no worries, right? Well, not so fast. We all need to pay attention to what Howard's going to tell us about municipal bonds. First, Howard, what are municipal bonds?
Well, Michelle, for purposes of this show, I'm going to make the assumption that people know what municipal bonds are. And let me make it very clear that I am not an investment advisor. I am not recommending nor disapproving the purchase or sale of municipal bonds. I have nothing to do with municipal bonds. I'm merely using this as an example to get a point across to our viewers and educate them on alternatives to more commonplace circumstances that are out there. So when we talk about municipal bonds, in my mind, what I think of is a program that allows somebody to put money into to receive income over a period of time, whether they buy 10-year bonds, 20-year bonds, 30-year bonds. And I find that many of the people that I have spoken with over the past 30 years have been very large purchasers of municipal bonds. Yet I have found that everyone seems to have overlooked something very important.
What is that?
What they've overlooked is in the overall discussion of estate planning, they have not realized that they are part of your estate and they are estate taxable. So what we're really discussing today is that municipal bonds may be tax-free, but they are income tax-free, not estate tax-free.
People get that confused because they hear tax-free. Aren't there people who are confused in terms of whether it's income tax, but then they forget, hey, wait a second, maybe not estate tax?
Well, probably, but it goes even further beyond that. I don't know that people even think about it. You know, in their mind, they're just looking for tax-free income, and this is a vehicle. But I'd like to defer to George for a moment, who is a certified financial planner. And George, you've dealt with the public when it comes to municipal bonds. And I know that you have noticed that there are some very key elements to these type of programs, which is what we're going to discuss when we get into the alternatives that exist. But why don't you tell us from your experience what you've noticed and what it is that we're trying to educate the public on?
Well, Howard, I think that I have seen so many people who are just not understanding really what the story is with the bonds. And often I'll say, well, municipal bonds are not tax-free. And they say, oh, absolutely they are. But of course they're not. I explain that they may be income tax-free, but they're not estate tax-free. And besides a federal estate tax, we could be also talking about a state estate tax.
So they're, in that case, they're actually paying triple taxes, so to speak.
Absolutely. So the people, they just don't understand. And, you know, that's a terrible, terrible thing. And we have to explain that to people and talk about the municipal bond alternative.
Absolutely. And Michelle, that's really, again, what the purpose of this show is, to educate
Yes.
on what the municipal bond alternative is and what are the things that are most important to people seeking these types of programs out.
So what are some of the alternatives, and what do you do in terms of evaluating your own individual situation to see what the alternatives are right for you?
Absolutely. Well, I look at a very generalized approach. I'm not interested, and I think George gets more into, being a CFP, gets more into looking at what people's holdings really are and to help discuss it with them. I'm really looking at the larger picture, which is the following. I have, let's use as an example, a couple who are 80 years old. And they've been, in fact, I'll give you the perfect example of somebody that I had discussed this with many years ago. He was 75 years old at the time, and he said to me, I love municipal bonds. And he said, I love them so much that I have $25 million in municipal bonds.
He really loves them.
He really loves them.
Okay.
And I said to him, well, that's wonderful. Do you need income? And he said, Howard, you know, if I have 25 million in municipal bonds, I've got 10 million in real estate, I've got 30 million in the market, I've got this, blah, 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 $70 million net worth. I said, well, so do you need income? He says, of course I don't need income.
Right.
I said, well, then why do you buy bonds? He goes, I like bonds. I said, well, let me understand this. You have $25 million in bonds. What kind of return do you make? He says 6%. Now, this is going back some years. I noticed how you hesitated for a moment there. But yes, he was making 6%. Well, what's 6% on 25 million? It's $1.5 million a year.
Tax-free.
Absolutely. Tax-free.
Right.
So I said, so you have this $1.5 million tax-free. Do you need that income? He says, no. I said, so what do you do with the $1.5 million? He goes, I buy more bonds. I said, but you don't need the income. I know, but I like bonds. So people get into this cycle where whether it serves what they're trying to accomplish or not, it's something that you're familiar with.
Right.
What's the old saying about familiarity?
I thought breeds contempt.
There
right?
it is. Well,
that's not a good thing.
No, well, so this is my point. Is it a good thing to keep buying bonds because you're familiar with them? Well, let's address what he's trying to accomplish. In this example, he says to me, listen, I know I don't need the income, but because I am familiar with bonds, I just want to keep accumulating.
Well, people feel safe with them, don't they? I mean,
they feel
safe. They feel like they can't lose their principal. They feel comfortable with them.
Absolutely. In fact, before I even continue, let me defer here to George on that point, because what we are talking about and what I try to convey on each show is safety, safety, safety.
Right.
And everything we're discussing about safety. Now, in your opinion, and some of the things that you've seen over the years, talk about that safety when it comes to not only bonds, but other what we call fixed instruments of that vein.
Well, firstly, let's go into bonds, and some of the problems with municipal bonds today is the fact that there's a great shortage of AAA bonds. In fact, there may be no AAA municipal bonds around today.
Well, can you just explain, just in case the viewers don't know about AAA bonds, is that a safety rating for the bonds?
Well, a AAA bond would be the safest rating, yes.
Okay.
From AAA, it would drop down to AA, to single A, into the Bs, and
that's basically how you measure the level of risk.
Okay.
But again, going back to these bonds, some of the things that you've seen with that safety aspect, the risk elements.
Well, with the risk element, right now there's a problem in the city of Detroit, where Detroit may be defaulting. They may be, there are certainly some local Detroit municipal bonds out there that are in danger of becoming worthless. So that's a great problem. There's a county in Alabama now, I think it's Jefferson County, Alabama, which has defaulted. So that's a problem. There was a problem 20 years ago in Washington State, the Whoops bond, which was a huge disaster. So municipal bonds have risk, and one of the great risks is the risk of defaulting. So the safety of municipal bonds, they may not be quite as safe as everybody thinks.
But again, I want to reiterate, we're not here to discuss whether they're safe for you or they're not safe. They're an excellent program that I don't have involvement with, but yet many people participate. So what I do is look to things that people are involved with and say, how can I educate them to make it better or to serve an additional purpose for them? Right. So going back to this family, this man who had the $25 million of municipal bonds, he's making $1.5 million a year. He says, I don't need the income, but I buy more bonds and I just accumulate. So I said, so what's fascinating about this is that your bond portfolio will continue to grow. And I said, here's one question for you. How old are you? He said 75. I said, and how old is your wife? And he said to me, she's 75 as well. And I said to him, well, let me ask you this. Do you believe that you can increase your bond portfolio to approximately $70 million.
And he said, no way.
He said, no, how did you guess?
Because it's completely unrealistic.
He looked at me like I had 3 heads. He says, well, Howard, why do you make such a preposterous statement?
Right.
You can't either. I said, well, you're right, I can't, because I don't sell municipal bonds, number one. But number two, let me give you an idea. And this is what we try to show people when it comes to life insurance. And this is really the entree into this muni bond alternative. The idea was that if you don't use that $1.5 million, I don't want to touch your principal. But do you realize a couple age 75, if I were to take the $1.5 million and gift that to a trust for the kids and use it to purchase life insurance, at their ages, I can create approximately $35 million. $35 million.
That's
maybe
amazing.
even $40 million of insurance. Now, I just said 70 million, right?
Right.
Why? You see, because if I could create 70 million after estate taxes, it would be worth the 35 million to my family. So what I've really done is I've purchased $35 million of insurance on these two people age 75 for the benefit of their children that will all be tax-free. The only way in this man's situation that his bonds can do the same thing is if he is able to accumulate, at his age of 75 now going forward, his 25 million to bonds, turning it into 70 million. Do we think there's a possibility?
No, there's no possibility
Absolutely not. However, this is good for them for one reason. They don't need the income. And as a result of not needing the income, I've created really the ultimate accumulation vehicle. I've eliminated the concern of estate taxes. I've eliminated another concern. George, what's happening these days with people that have bonds, but all of a sudden they find that they're being called? And all of a sudden they're not earning the same 6% that he thought he was earning, because how long will a municipality allow you to make that kind of interest rate?
Exactly.
So therefore, we are in a situation where I've eliminated all different levels of risk. Just go through some of the different risks. We already talked about the safety.
Credit risk, default risk, inflation risk, reinvestment risk.
That's probably the biggest one that people don't get. What do I mean by that? You have a
Right.
bond or anything else for that matter. They can call you on the bond. They can call it. So you bought it with 6%.
And so, wait a second. So you don't know when they could do that, when the call could come, basically, that the bond's going to be called in.
Well, you know, if interest rates are low, then there's a good chance if you have a high interest rate bond that
It's going to be called
that they
in.
may call it.
Wow.
Now the question is, what do you do? Now this is the greatest. I hear from people all the time. You know, Howard, I'm not interested in going into insurance or annuities right now. Why is that? Well, I'm a bond buyer and I'm doing very well. I got 5% on my bonds. Really? How? Well, people forget that they may pay a premium. They don't factor these things in.
Okay.
So again, let's get back to the crux of this, our municipal bond alternative. The idea being, in this example, I showed this family how to create the equivalent of 70 million, which after tax is 35. They can't increase their bonds to that. The next point, there are a few different types of our muni bond alternative that we're discussing today.
Okay.
There is a way to have the same income. Now, if I said to you, Michelle, you have $1 million in bonds and you're making $50,000 a year, I can create the same $50,000 a year for you after tax with our muni bond alternative. Is that any real benefit to you?
Not really.
No, but if I said to you, you can eliminate the concern that upon death, your $1 million of municipal bonds will only be worth $500,000 after estate taxes,
Right.
and my way, there will be a full $1 million payable to your kids, then what would you say?
I want to know exactly what I need to do.
Absolutely.
Because I don't want to give so much money to the government.
So as long as you're not hurt from a standpoint of income, Now the question is, how do I solve the other problem, which is the estate tax issue on that principal?
So what do we do?
Well, in this case, George, why don't you get into this, showing how we're able to create the same type of income that a bond will offer, yet not be subjected to the estate taxes that ultimately will come.
Well, there's something called an immediate annuity. And an immediate annuity, depending on somebody's age, and the older a person is, the greater the return, and it's a return of principal and interest. And often the return is great. Let's assume, let's be specific, let's assume somebody, say, is 80 years old and they could get a 10% return on principal and interest. So they have...
Remember, they're not making 10% interest, but they're getting cash flow of 10% because that is principal and return of interest.
Okay.
So if they're getting, say, $100,000 a year, a 10% return on their $1 million, with that $100,000, well, now they could do a lot of things. One of the things they could do is to perhaps buy a life insurance policy.
Right.
And depending on their health situation, it could be a last to die, a survivorship policy. They could use some of the money to pay the premiums on that, the monies that they're getting from the immediate annuity, and the balance would be to put in their pocket. Or they could do the opposite way. They could say, I'm getting 5%, I'm getting $50,000 a year from my bonds. I'm going to take that $50,000 now, put it in my pocket. Whatever is left, I'm going to put into the premiums on a life insurance policy.
On a new policy, okay.
So there are 4 different approaches, 4 plans within this municipal bond alternative.
Okay.
We discussed the first one earlier, but what I call the maximum inheritance plan. The maximum inheritance plan is just that. I don't need income, but I have an asset. In this case, the man had municipal bonds, and he's just taking his income and buying more bonds. Is there a better way to create more money for the ultimate benefit of family or charity?
And you said there was, obviously.
There was. We were able to buy $35 million of insurance, which is the equivalent of him creating $70 million. So after tax, it's right back down to the 35.
Right.
So that was number one, what we call the maximum inheritance plan. Gave up income. Let's go to number 2. This we call the increased income plan.
Okay.
Now, what is the increased income plan? Let's bring the numbers down to a smaller figure. Somebody has $1 million in municipal bonds. Let's say in today's real world, they're making 3.5%. Is that a fair assumption? 4%?
3.5 is a big number.
Good. I'm going to go to 4 to make it even bigger.
Okay, so they're making 4%.
So on $1 million, that's $40,000 a year. And at death, assuming they have an estate tax problem, you tell me, what will their $1 million be worth to their family?
Oh, don't make me do math.
50-50.
Ask the expert,
50-50.
okay?
50-50, right?
50-50.
So 50% goes to?
The government,
and 50% goes to
the
family.
survivors. Yeah.
Okay. So that means the $1 million is really worth $500,000 if they're in an estate tax plan. Now I'm doing general figures.
Right.
Here,
So we need to, but we need to avoid that because that's too much to give up.
Absolutely. So
Okay.
what is the increased income plan? I'm suggesting that if I took the money and put it into an immediate annuity, this $1 million, and I was able, we'll use George's example, of being able to create 10% cash flow. That's $100,000 a year. That will last for as long as you live, okay? Now with that $100,000, what happens is I've given up my principal, but I want to make sure I'm in the same position I was with those bonds. So what does that mean? I want to know that at least $500,000 of the $1 million goes to my kids at death. So what do I do? Out of the $100,000 of income, I'm going to buy a $500,000 life insurance policy.
And that's the protection.
That's the protection. So
Right.
let's just say that were to cost me $30,000 a year. Well, I put that into place. I have my $500,000 of insurance, and I have $70,000 of income. After tax, I may be down to $60,000 or so. Well, if you told me you were making 35 or 40,000 a year, and I have come in and am able to create 60,000 a year,
Did great.
I guess that was our increased income plan.
Okay.
Let's go to number 3, our increased inheritance plan. Same idea, $1 million of asset. The bonds were making 35 or 40,000 a year. I take $1 million and create an immediate annuity that I'm receiving 100,000 a year, let's say.
Okay.
But this time, I'm not as concerned with income as I am inheritance. So what do I want to make sure occurs? I want to make sure that my children receive the full $1 million that I put into the program.
That's right, and you have to avoid estate taxes to do that, or else they're going to be losing it.
How quickly is she learning?
I'm learning.
Absolutely.
There you go. 3 experts.
Absolutely. So
You guys are rubbing off on me.
in order to do this, I now, instead of buying like I did in number 2, a $500,000 policy, I'm going to buy a $1 million life insurance policy. And when I buy that $1 million life insurance policy, now it may cost me $60,000 a year. Well, if I take it off of the 100, I guess I have roughly $40,000 left. So I put you in a position where you have the same income,
But better benefit.
but better benefit for the family ultimately, and that's our increased inheritance plan. Number 4, the last plan, our maximum income plan. This is where somebody says, listen, I love bonds because it gives me income.
Right.
Whatever happens when I pass away happens. If my kids get money, wonderful. If charity gets money, wonderful. But if there was a way that I could create the most amount of income for me so that I can enjoy the rest of my life, what is it? It's this maximum income plan.
So how does this one work?
This is, I'm buying that same annuity with the $100,000 of income for the rest of my life, guaranteed until I pass away, or it could be with your spouse as well. But this time I'm not buying a life insurance policy to back it up.
Okay.
I'm just taking the income. So for the person that really doesn't care or has no children or doesn't need to preserve the capital, they just want to make sure they have all the money in the world to live on and that they don't run out of money. That's where number 4, the maximum income plan, comes into effect.
So it's really not one plan fits every person. It's very, very individualized depending on what you want and what your needs are.
Correct. And you know, I know today we've picked on bonds, but I don't care whether it's bonds or treasuries or CDs or wherever you're, deriving your income from. I just want to make the point that there are strategies within the life insurance and annuity fields that people didn't realize could achieve these type of results that we're talking about today. And again, we want to educate the public on these things. George, any comments on, you've been through the 4 plans before, you understand how they work, but some of the reactions that you hear from different people that have discussed these approaches with you?
Well, I think that the municipal bond alternative really is a terrific plan because of often the misunderstanding of people who just don't quite get it. And the fact that they're saying that my bonds are tax-free, and as you said, well, they're not really totally tax-free. The other thing is talking about bonds and just some of the misapprehensions of some people who buy a bond and then say, I've bought a 5% bond, but they didn't buy a 5% bond. The important thing in looking at a municipal bond is the yield to maturity. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand that. So they'll look at the coupon rate and they'll say, well, I have a big coupon. They're not saying that they paid $120 for that $100 bond. And when that bond matures, it's called, or when it does mature, they're only going to get 100. So if they paid 120 and now they're getting 100, they lost 20%.
That's a lot.
But the bottom line is, as we've discussed, in utilizing a combination of annuities, life insurance, with proper planning, with your professional, your insurance professional out there, you can really be shown alternatives to the in-the-box, so to speak, strategies, and really show you how to tailor specifically to what it is you'd like to achieve.
I've never heard of these definite alternatives to municipal bonds, and I'm sure that many of the viewers haven't either. And these are very, very important things to consider, especially because we have hard-earned money that we want to protect, that we want to be able to pass on, or to give to our favorite charities.
And ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to protecting and growing your wealth for your families, for favorite charities, for your peace of mind, that's the bottom line, because there's so much that can be done. Remember, information is available, 561-417-5883 or insurewealthtv.com.
Thank you both so much for joining us here to talk about some different alternatives to municipal bonds.
Our pleasure.
And see you all next week right here on Insure Wealth.